Welcome to the Alive and Kicking podcast. I'm your host, Kay Eck, and this is where we talk to ordinary people about their extraordinary lives. Welcome back to the podcast, everybody. And today I'm delighted to introduce to the Alive and Kicking listeners and viewers my friend Carmen Santiago-Keenon. Welcome, Carmen.
Oh, thank you for having me. Thank you. And thank you for creating this space of not only community, but awareness and joy and love. And I'm just so grateful that we're friends and that you've invited me here today. So thank you.
It's so nice to have you. And I know I've only scratched the surface with you. So I'm looking forward to diving a little bit deeper because I know you have a really compelling story to tell that people are going to enjoy and be inspired by. So let's just get started.
All right, let's hit it.
All right. So I'm interested in learning about your background as a child and how you came into this world. Tell me what your sense of yourself was, and what was the situation that you were born into?
Okay, so for me, I was born 4 pounds, addicted to cocaine. My mother was a young mom, but she was also an addict. And that wasn't all that she was, but at that place in time, that was going on there. And that was my introduction to the world. So I was this 4-pound, finicky, coke-filled baby. And so my presence in the world was from the beginning very intense. It was very volatile, if you will. And my innate state was heightened. So super anxious, super just unsteady. And that was kind of my introduction to the world. If you see my newborn baby picture, I literally have my dukes up and my face, that's just my face whenever I'm frowning, almost like I knew okay, here we go. But yeah, that's kind of the way that I entered this world. And so, I always tell people that my innate self is kind of like a little Tasmanian devil, it was just little just anxiety and, So that was.
That must have been something obviously that you reflected on back, once you reached a certain level of awareness about who you were. But you must not have really had an awareness of that as a child, that you came in with an automatic struggle with something that formed you early on that you had no control over. So, right, what was your childhood like? What were you like as a toddler and a child?
Well, from what I hear, so my mom ended up passing away when I was 6 years old. But after I was born, because my mom wasn't, the healthiest person at that time, and she was an addict. My grandparents, who at the time lived in Wisconsin, got a call from my mom's friend, whomever she left me with. And basically they were told that my mom had abandoned me there. I was maybe about a month old, if that, and that I was out of diapers, food, I wasn't her responsibility. And if they didn't pick me up, I was going to be thrown in the trash. So my grandmother and her, and my step-grandfather drove and picked me up, and then, brought me back to Wisconsin with them. And at the time, my grandmother, my biological mom's youngest sister, my aunt Amy, was 16 and lived, at home with my grandma and her stepdad. So that's how I was brought into their home. And then through that, my mom really wasn't able to be consistent in my life. I was being born 4 pounds, addicted to, with cocaine in your system, you're an anxious person. I was a very hard child to pacify. I wasn't good at self-soothing. That's still something that I work at as a 41-year-old woman, right? Um, I came, I was difficult, difficult in the sense that I was a volatile little child because, this is the way that I came into the world. Um, then later on, we moved to Chicago. I only lived in Wisconsin briefly, maybe till I was 2. Then we moved back to the inner city, Chicago. I grew up Fullerton and Cicero for the better part of that time. And, in the interim, like I said, my mom passed away when I was 6. I don't, my memories of my mom really are waiting outside, looking outside the window, waiting for her to show up, right? And her not being able to show up and feeling that hurt and that abandonment, even though I didn't know her. But the talk track around me was, your mom was an addict. My family loved my mom. My mother, my biological mother, Carmen. I also have her name. There's 5 Carmens in my family. She was the first granddaughter. I'm big on talking about generational strongholds. And so for my family, my great grandma, in Puerto Rico in 1918, whatever it was married at 15, started having babies at 15, right? She had 6 kids. My grandmother, Carmen, so it's my great grandma Carmen, my grandma Carmen, my mom Carmen. So my grandma had my mom at, 15, 16 years old when she got married. And then my mom had me at 19. And through that, there's not a lot of awareness. And then I ended up becoming a mom at 19 as well, right? So there's the whole generational stronghold circle of life right there. But through that, they loved my mom. My mom was the first, granddaughter and niece to all my aunts. My mother was a beautiful woman. She was, twig model. She, was a musician, super talented, but she had her struggles and she became an addict at an early age. And, didn't really, knowing me and knowing life, understand now, right? The dysregulation and all the things and how trauma manifests and things like that. But she just wasn't able to show up. So for me, growing up was interesting in the sense that I was told to love my mom, but also heard the stories of her drug abuse and how I was going to grow up to be just like her and all these things. So as I grew and started to look more like my mother, I mean, I look pretty much identical to my biological mom, and started having, my own stuff come up. It was hard for my biological family. I also was in a situation that was abusive with my grandfather. He was a very abusive, emotionally, mentally, physically abusive towards my grandmother, myself. He's the reason my mom and her siblings, left the home as teenagers. And, when we lived in the city, there was still a lot of trauma and things. But when we ended up moving to the suburbs, we moved to Glendale Heights when I was about 13 years old. And which is about 30, maybe 35 minutes west from the inner city. Things were a little different. The school system was more involved. So I was going to school, with bruises and upset, and schoolwork was, I was an angry kid. I was an overweight kid. I was fighting and I was pushing back a lot. And so the school therapist got involved in things. And as things started to come out, they understood that there was abuse going on. And then eventually DCFS stepped in when I was almost 14, like between 13, 14 years old. So at the middle of my 8th grade year, they stepped in and took guardianship from my grandparents. And then I spent a little blurb of time in a hospital because they were trying to regulate me. So that's when they started introducing me to antidepressants and mood stabilizers and all the things. And that's all. We'll delve into that maybe a little bit later. And then through that, I had 2 experiences with 2 different foster homes very briefly until they were able to either find me a placement in a group home setting or in a foster home. And that's when I was introduced to my now adopted parents, Paul and Jill Keenon. So that's where Keenan comes in to my name. They were my first interview in life. They lived in Wheaton, Illinois, and they had a nonprofit called Open Door for Teens, where they were the only family really taking in teenagers as foster kids, because they understood, right? We're not cute and cuddly. We have issues. We have parents with issues. We have a lot of crap. But that was their mission work. My parents are missionaries through Wheaton Bible Church. They were missionaries through there. And that was their nonprofit, Open Door for Teen.
That
Yeah.
is an incredible calling. Wow.
Yeah.
So before we move into that next chapter, I want to dive in a little bit more to this first chapter, because the picture that you're painting of your upbringing and your family's history and legacy, it is really making it clear how generational trauma persists through the generations. And if you look at it's not the fact that your mother or your grandmother had, or your great grandmother had children at the age of 15. It's like, that's not, it's the circumstances around which that created this, the situation that allowed that to happen. So how have you sort of dived into that generational trauma? Because you have the abuse and also the abandonment issue. So how were you able to dive into that, and how did it affect you as a kid growing up?
Well, for me, I had to really, what has helped me heal that generational trauma and really break it and heal it is delving into my faith. So for me, it's Jesus. It's, taken a long time to get back to that place of understanding my identity, in Christ, my identity as a woman, my understanding that, my earthly mother and father are all well and good, and I chose them for my life's journey, but he's my father, right? But it took a long time, and it's still something that he's unfolding, and he and I are working together in understanding that and building my relationship with God and that understanding. But that's what really has helped me understand and heal. And, bringing that full circle, my grandmother, definitely, has a more understanding around faith, and we've been able to heal those generational, those things, and we're working on healing those things, right? Mm-hmm. But that's really what it was for me. And it wasn't until, I really delved into different types of healing, right? So therapy, but there's also different types of therapy, right? Like there's womb therapy, there's all sorts of things where you can go back and work on things that aren't as mainstream, but it is there. EMT, tapping, I'm a big tapper, energy work, all those things, but really uncovering and getting to the core of it. I think all of us really, with my great grandma, her circumstance came from abandonment. Her mother died at a young age. She was placed in care with her aunt in Puerto Rico as a young girl. And she literally had like a Cinderella story. She was severely abused, had just all the things. They made her stop going to school in like first grade, really treated her like she wasn't part of the family. So when she met my great grandfather, I could only imagine, because I know that was kind of for me too, when you don't understand love and you're seeking love, you're going to, she married my great grandfather, and he was older than she was, and they proceeded to have 6 kids, but she, and that's twofold. That's kind of the culture back, right? Back then, but also that trauma, right? And then I think that that's pretty much probably what happened with my grandmother, Carmen, the same thing, right? My great grandparents had a very toxic environment, but they didn't know better, right? And that's really at the root of this. And the more that I uncover, and the more that I heal, and the more that I understand, I'm able to give that grace and forgiveness and understanding, because we're human. And if it's now at 41, I'm just starting to understand, and the world is just starting to unleash different types of modalities for healing and resources. I can only imagine in 1920. You know what I mean? Like, you had no resources. What you did was you got married at 13 and had babies.
Yeah.
There was no learning how to become a young lady and then learning how to become a woman and unfolding of yourself, right? And if you don't have that, how are you going to teach that and instill that in your daughters and in your sons, right? So it does cause this cycle of generational strongholds and toxicity and mindsets and ways of thinking and operating that then get deeply rooted into family systems. And you see that, branched out through different, families throughout your family, and generations and things like that. And I do definitely believe it's been my experience that we house trauma within our bodies and our cells. And even if we're most of us subconsciously don't understand that we're operating from that system as well, that fight or flight response, and when you're constantly programmed to work in that way, and then you're, mentally, but then you take it a step further. And if you, do epigenetic study or any of those things where it shows the science behind, yes, our body houses these things, and then it manifests into illnesses and all these other things. Depression for me, it was an autoimmune condition on top of depression and, anxiety and all the things. But until you really start to peel back the onion and start to delve into that. But it started with wanting to know more. Even as a little girl, though, I understood that my environment wasn't conducive to who I was. I was always an awkward kid. I preferred to be by myself and create or paint or write. I'm a musician, I'm a creator. And that was kind of my respite from my world, was reading, writing, creating, drawing, singing, painting. But the more that, I delved into the therapy, the more that I delved into things that are not pretty, and the more that I realized, okay, yes, these things have happened, these things are happening. But now you, Carmen, as the woman, knowing the things that how can you take accountability for your life, your mind, body, and spirit? Because it's the trifecta, and once I started working it and understanding it that way, I was able to start healing more of this, and then bringing that to my children, and trying to do different and better. I don't know if better is the right way, because I feel like we do the best that we can in what we are, right? And in being a mom and in making the choices that I've made, which, are very similar to how my mom did it, who I never even met, right? And that's, when you really start thinking about, for me at least, like, okay, her biology is in me, her cells are in me, so you do need to delve a little bit deeper and really start to want to do the work. The easy thing, and for a long time, because I was prescribed so many medications, I was a zombie. I was a walking disaster zombie, and it wasn't until I got off of all the pharmaceutical drugs that I'm at a healthier place now. And that's the hardest work to do, is, when you're just like, I need to delve in deep, and I need to be of right mind, so that I can really start understanding and grabbing a handle of this.
I'm really interested in the generational trauma, because I was speaking with someone the other day, and we were talking about how when you are born into a family, you start to change and adapt based on your environment. And we commonly think of that as the thought patterns, like we adopt the thought patterns of our parents, which is true. But we also change physically, like we start to see how physically our parents are in the world, and we mimic that. And so, like that's how gestures pass on from generation. Like, it's, oh my God, you just did something that was like, my grandmother did the same gesture, and this is how we like morph. And so like, we don't even really have a great sense of who we are, because we're formed by our surroundings. And so I'm curious as to, it seems like you took on things from your mother, even though she was like a complete absence in your life. So how do you think like your you molded yourself to accommodate that absence.
So I do think there is power in our tongue, right? And so generational strongholds, again, because my faith is rooted in Jesus, biblically, it speaks a lot about generational strongholds. And when you take it to the biology of it, it's interesting that we're having this conversation, because I was with my best friend, Sarah, last night. We were having this conversation as well. And I had just read something that was curious to me, where it was saying, that they had done an experiment with some cells, and the people were placed in one room. Their cells were in a petri dish or whatever in another room. And they could see how their cells were changing, even though they were in the other room. They were still being affected by their thought patterns, their emotions. And that's interesting to me, because I think, wow, so my kids have my biology. I have my mom's biology. So if this is what they're uncovering, if I'm feeling anxious, like if I'm at home and my son's in DeKalb in college and I'm having a moment where I'm anxious or depressed or whatever, and he's feeling funky and he doesn't know why, is that associated to that? So I myself am really curious to keep delving into the science behind it, because I do think it's twofold, right? And I do think that we have the power of life or death in our tongue. So for me, when you tell a kid or anybody, when you speak death over that person, you say, oh, you're going to be like your mom. You're going to be a drug addict. You're going to be this. You're going to be that. What do you think is going to manifest, right? So part of it, I do think, is my biology. My mom is in me, right? And I love that. I love that people can look at me and be like, oh, you look like your mom. You're a musician like your mom. When I was a kid, I was angry about it because I was angry at her and I didn't understand. But now, living the life that I've had, mimicking a lot of the same decisions that she made, and going through therapy and delving in deep in a lot of different therapies and things that are still allowing me to heal, right? Because we're a work in progress. You can't just undo 41 years of junk like this, but luckily God gives us grace and he gives us people in our environment, to help us along that journey of healing. Yeah. But I really do think that, for me at least, it was twofold. It was just the innate biology that we have that we don't even know is within us, right? And then that people in my environment at a young age speaking that death over me, and I kind of housed that, even if I wasn't aware that I was housing that. And then I started performing from that space. Oh, I guess I am a drug addict. Oh, I guess I'm going to amount to nothing. I guess I am going to just be this, that, or the other. And then you throw in somebody, I think at the core also of generational strongholds is having a shattered self of identity. Because at least for me, I didn't understand, I was never comfortable in my own skin. Even as a baby, I was finicky. I was born 4 pounds addicted to cocaine. And if you've ever done coke, you're a finicky, person. And that's kind of, still, I think, the underlying of my personality is kind of, I would always explain it to people like, oh, it's like having an emotional sunburn. When people would say, well, don't cry, that saying, don't cry over spilled milk. I'd be like, the first one bawling and be like, but why did you spill the milk? And how did you spill, like all the things, everything affected me that much more than a lot of people in my environment, and everything was just always just raw. And I wasn't allowed to, at the time, because I don't know a lot about my biology. I don't know who my biological father was, other than he was Italian. I didn't have the opportunity to meet my mother, only the things that have been communicated to me about who she was, right? And then I really wasn't allowed to explore anything beyond that, because then I was in a foster home and I wasn't, and then, so a lot of things were displaced. So it took a really long time, and it's still something that I'm continually uncovering and trying to, work through all the things that have made, the generational strongholds, and, looking into my family system, aunts, cousin, like how has all of these things, when we talk about generational mindsets and strongholds and things, it's rooted in family, and whether it manifests through just me, we've seen this story play out in my family through, through other people in different ways, whether mothering at an early age, addictions at an early age, all of it, and there's no judgment or shame around that, but it's getting to the root cause, and then working from that and working it up from there and understanding your identity in your faith, whatever that is for you. For me, it's Jesus, and really looking vertical to God to say, okay, you show me my truth. The world doesn't get to tell me that I'm a drug addict baby, that I'm a piece of crap, that I won't amount to anything. I lived in that truth and in that lie that was sown into my soul and into my being at an early age. For a long time, I lived in that lie and I operated in that system. And it wasn't, again, until I started understanding, and it really just started happening, honestly, a handful of years ago, when I found out that I was allergic to all pharmaceutical drugs. And you're talking to someone who's been given everything since I was 13, right? To help manage the world around me. Yeah. It's easier to give you a pill, it's easier to send your kid to therapy. I've done it too, than to delve into the root cause, right?
And there was so much for you. I mean, there was so much trauma, and to be presented with a young person, a child who has so much damage, it's almost like, how do we do this? Do you have the understanding that healing you is healing your lineage backward? And how did you come to that understanding?
Again, the more that I got rooted in my identity in God, honestly, the more that, I had to detox for myself, which is one of my brands. That's the best way to say it, is I had to detox, do a complete, utter detox of the persons and personas and things that I've had to craft to get through certain seasons of my life, right? Whether it was, the unhinged teenager, right? That was living out that story. I'm like my mom, I'm going to make these choices, even if I was living through that subconsciously, to then, in my 20s, marriage, divorce, kids, drug abuse, drug use, you're talking to someone that survived 4 bullets. I've been shot 4 times, it is by the grace of God that I literally am walking, breathing human being. I've survived. I have a metal elbow from another incident where somebody tried to, I've had more life, death experiences than I care to recount. And that's how I can stand in my authority and my faith. I almost died twice clinically, and it's out for the world to see. You can Google all these things, about me, because it's been out in the world. And the understanding of seeing God's handprint over my life and understanding that there is purpose in my life, and that through the mess came and is coming the message, and through the tests, here's my testimony, right? I get to stand here and tell people, listen, it is hard, and generational strongholds are real and true. And, you can make the choice here and now to decide to break that. It's not going to be easy. It's not a walk in the park. It is something that you have to consciously decide every day to participate in, working through these things,
Yeah. So take us back to your time in the hospital, because prior to that, you were in 2 foster care situations, right? And what was that experience like, and how did you end up in the hospital?
Well, I've actually been hospitalized several times because, they started pumping me full. And let me just say, it's my experience with medication. Personally, I understand that medication works for people. I'm not here saying I'm anti-meds. This is just my personal experience. I just wanted to throw that caveat out there.
Definitely.
For me, I'm allergic to medication. We took the swab. There's a test you can take. Your doctors, if you think that that's an issue for you, your doctors can do it. The technology just unfolded over a few years ago when I got this test. But for a long time, because they didn't understand that I was allergic to every medication. I mean, even if I take a Tylenol or an Advil, I'm sick. I was in and out of the hospital because they were trying to regulate my moods, all the things. So I was basically like a guinea pig, you know? So unfortunately for my kids and myself and my family and friends, for a very long time, they saw this person that mimicked a bipolar, manic depressive, borderline personality type person because I was so dysregulated. I was on drugs. And people are like, we didn't know you were on drugs. And I'm like, well, pharmaceutical drugs, is the same thing for me as being on drugs, which I was on both kinds. I was trying to fix the craziness that I was feeling and instability of the pharmaceutical drugs with, street drugs. Well, if I do this or that, at least, so it was this really awful, just space and time and energy around me. But when I was younger, my first being there, I was a young kid. I was 13. They put me into the hospital, and DCFS got involved in all the things. And that time, that's when they quote unquote diagnosed me, right? So they're like, oh, she's bipolar. And it was like 1993. So at that time, even then, they didn't think that kids could be bipolar. So my doctor at the time got a lot of pushback, but he started treating me like that. So lithium, all these things. And that kind of started that, hamster wheel of what works, what doesn't work, what works, what doesn't work. And that dysregulation. And by the time I was only there for about 2 or 3 months until they found my foster parents. But my foster parents, since they were the only people really wanting to take in foster kids, they had limited space. So in Illinois, you're allowed to have 8 kids live under your home if you're a foster parent. Mm-hmm. However that pans out. So my parents had 3 biological kids of their own, and then 5 foster girls at all times. One of the girls was leaving, and so I went in to interview to take her spot, to take her bed. And, I remember my dad looking me in my face, and I was so scared, because I had no idea what was going to happen to me next, right? But I knew that this was probably better than ending up in a group home somewhere, and, he asked me, he's like, why should we allow you to move into this home? And I looked him dead in the face and I said, because I know if I'm given the right resources and tools, I can make something of myself. I understood that much, even as a little girl. I understood that. And it's not because, my grandmother who raised me, I love her and there's forgiveness there. And I get it. I get what it's like to be in an abusive, traumatic relationship, because guess what? I dove headfirst into many of those cycles, right? And she loved me and she raised me and she's instilled in me nurturing and all the things, and I'm so grateful for all 3 of my mothers, my biological mom. I get my beauty, a lot from my biological mother, my grandma mom, who's instilled my mothering, my nurturing, my heritage, my culture, my Puerto Ricanness, my Latinaness, right? And then my foster mom, my adopted mom, my heart mom, Jill, who then stepped in when I was 13 and showed me a different way of mothering, and I sit in this place where I'm just so thankful for this experience and for my mothers and for my life. And I know it might sound crazy to some, right? But it's what allows me to sit here in this place, to sit here and tell you, I've survived 4 bullets to my back. Every doctor woke up, looked at me, and they were like, do you know that any of these bullets missed half an inch of killing you? I couldn't walk for 3 days. Luckily, the steroid that they gave me helped the shrinking around my spine. And I walked out of there, almost a week later. And stories after stories. I've had cancer. I've had cervical cancer twice. I've had so many things. It's a running joke in my family that I'm like a cat with 9 lives, But that shows you the grace and the mightiness of God and how he's using me now through you, through this, in the last 3 years, 2 years really, that I've delved into this healing and understanding that, hey, the data shows me, I'm in tech, so I'm a data-driven person. It shows me that I'm allergic to all this medicine. Okay, I can either decide to take on the lie of I'm going to be a sick person with an autoimmune condition and I'm going to be bipolar and I'm going to be all these things, or I can look at the data and say, all right, there's this, but there's also another truth. And the other truth is that I believe in a God that is healing and that is healing me. I have enough within myself to dig deep and start understanding how I can take authority and control over my mind, my body, and my spirit. And nothing will move forward until you start renewing your mind. That's why the Bible speaks to renewal of your mind. Gandhi, all of the people that, we listen to, we follow, speak about healing. You always bring that back to, renewal of your mind. You've got to renew your mind. But what does that mean? And as you start renewing your mind, you can start uncovering, generational strongholds, because you're no longer going through, life with the vision that everybody else does. I have a faith vision. So that's giving me a different understanding now than when I was just walking, aimlessly like a zombie, all doped up, and yeah, I was going to therapy, but I wasn't at a place to even understand how to go, really go through the therapy, because I was clouded and foggy and going through all these things. But once you start, first you have to make the decision, because it's, like I said, the easier route for a long time was to just be like, okay, more meds, change my meds, go to therapy, blah, 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 walk through the motions. But that was ineffective. And that still allowed me to stay in my victimhood, in my shame cycles, in the toxic cycles, in the generational strongholds. And it wasn't until I, had to make that choice. I had to literally decide, okay, either be sick and live that life wholeheartedly, or be well and live that life wholeheartedly. And yeah, and I decided, you know what? And from that, God has literally given me so many different practitioners. And, I love Jesus, that's my faith, but I work with all practitioners that believe in all sorts of things, because at the root of that is love, right? And if we come from that understanding and knowing that God loves you, whatever that means to you, delve into that. Because once you understand that you are vertical, not horizontal, you start operating differently. So now when people ask me things, like the other day, my girlfriend asked me something, she was going through a difficult hiccup, and she's like, how would you handle this? And I paused. 3 years ago, I would have been like, girl, you need to snap, you need to do that. Now I can say, you know what? I said, hold that thought. I'm going to pray about it, and I'm going to think this through, but don't react, don't respond. Go, read, work out, whatever you need to do. Just give me a second. 4 years ago, Carmen from the block would have came up all thuggish and been like, girl, this is what you need to do, But now, maturing, as a human, as a woman, as all the things, I pause, I breathe, I ask, first and foremost, God, how do you want me to respond or react? A lot of the time, God just says that you just need to be quiet for now, And so that was my advice. I said, hey, breathe, ask a question, don't react. And if you respond out of love, kindness, whatever, right? Totally different than and she's been my friend for 20 years. And then later on, she's like, thank you for that. Thank you for that. That's what I needed. She didn't, like I said, 3 years ago, I probably would have given her the wrong advice. And she would have called me like, girl, pick me up, I'm about to get a divorce, or whatever the case is, right? And just, but it comes from having a different knowing, So when people ask me questions now, how do you feel about this, that, or the other? I'm like, do you really want the answer? Because I'm not going to give you a worldview. My view isn't from the world anymore. My view is vertical. God, what do you want? You've saved my life, not because of me, because you want to work something through me. So you tell me, how do I help this person? Yeah. What does that look like?
That the image of the verticality is really poignant for me personally. I don't know if it will be for others, but when I pull into myself, pull back from the world, that is the geometry that surfaces for me. I'm like this linear column with my heart at the center, and below me is Mother Gaia, and above me is Mother God. And it's like this, it is very vertical. And yeah, like the horizontal is like being in the world and of the world. And of course we have to do that too, but that isn't where we find our truest self. It's like like here. But the thing that I wanted to pause on for a moment is like when you said that at 13, having been through what you had been through, that you still had faith in yourself, that there was a version of yourself outside of your circumstances that you knew, even though you weren't living as that person, you knew that that was your potential. Like, oh, that just made me want to cry. Like that is such a blessing and a incredible, it's a miracle really that in your circumstances you were able to reach for that and to know that. And that must have impacted your parents so strongly. What was their reaction to that?
My dad was like, okay, later. And then I found out that I was going to be able to move into the house. And later on, he was like, yes, we knew at that moment you were going to be our daughter, yours, but I was at the time, I was the youngest kid that they had taken in. I was just going in a freshman year. I was displaced. My best friend who I'm in her lovely home today, she's known me since I was 13 years old. We didn't even become really best friends until we were 15, 16 years old, but we've grown together as women, right? Young girls and women. And so she's seen both sides of my life. I only have a couple people in my life like that know pre and post, right? But, I really think when I was younger, because I lost myself, and which is interesting because I'm also neurodivergent. So I'm dyslexic, but everything I do, I'm in tech, I'm in constantly writing, reading, doing things because I'm a big believer in, retraining yourself and neuroelasticity and all those things. But I remember reading a book when I was in maybe second grade. Are You There, God? It's Me, Margaret. Maybe Judy Blume, maybe. I want to say it was, and it was just this girl journaling because I was in that place, I was a girl in that place and it talked about all the things, right? And she was just journaling to God. Are you there, God? It's me, Margaret, with all these questions and all these things. And I really think that book gave me that, like, even though I didn't understand, even though I was angry, even though, quite frankly, I hated God for a very long time. And maybe some other time we can delve into the conversation of spiritual warfare. But I understand, I have a very clear understanding when things in my spiritual life shifted for the worse. Very clear. I was very young when I made that agreement, because I do believe, again, that we do agree with things. We live in a place of spirits and principalities, good versus evil. That's a real thing. Energetically, like it's, energy is energy. However you want to dice it up, however you want to look at it, it's a real thing, right? We can all agree energy vibrations, it's a thing. So, but going from that place and just understanding, and then I lost it for a long time. My identity was wrapped up in sickness and depression. I took on, all these different personality types for those seasons of my life. Then, I, at 30, had the opportunity to get into the technology space. And then that switched a lot for me in regards to building a career and a place for myself, and craft a niche for myself without having a college degree, without doing all these things. And that's pivoted into, my career now. And so grateful for that. But then I had to put on the persona of, well, now I'm this adult technology, career-driven woman, and this other persona. So I was constantly, because I had a displaced sense of self and no real identity yet, my identity was really, and I think one thing I really hope, that I really understand now is we are spiritual beings, right? We open ourselves up. We're portals. We open ourselves up to good and to bad, right? So if you're taking on the persona of sick, if you're taking on the persona of, crazy, sometimes, yeah, I am crazy. So what? I'm feisty. I'm a Puerto Rican Italian. Deal with it. No, that's crap. That's the easy way. That's the easy way to behave. The harder way to behave is to really dig in deep and try to understand your true identity. And once I started doing that, and honestly, it's coming on to 3 years, but that took me making the clear-cut decision to take total, full 100% accountability for myself, mind, body, and spirit. Then I was in agreement with God, and God was like, cool, let's do this. he brought into my life, different practitioners. Dr. Shannon Meyer helped me. She's an amazing person. Gut health, brain health, all these things. And she actually asked me, I think one of the most important questions that people have ever asked, that any doctor, therapist has ever asked me. She said, Carmen, she goes, I want you to go back and journal. So this is where the healing, go back to when you were a kid, start writing down your earliest memories of when you were sick and how people treated, and what did you get out of it? And I was like, once I really started writing things down, and I was like, wow, well, I was in an abusive home, but whenever I was sick, that's when my grandma would really, she was already loving and whatever, but that's when really, and I got nurturing in a different way. When my dyslexia started really rearing its head, I would get really, now I understand it as anxiety, but my grandma would always get a phone call from the school around math. Come pick Carmen up. She's sick. She's at the nurse's office. The value in me being sick there was, well, I got to leave the stressful situation and be comforted and taken care of. That was huge to really start writing down and understanding where the value is in the sickness, and Dr. Shannon Meyer, she's amazing. I'll connect the two of you for sure. But that was so, honestly, out of all the therapy that I've spent, and that was, that was in her free consult, actually. I didn't even have to pay for that golden nugget of therapy.
Wow.
All the thousands of dollars and years spent on, pharmaceutical drugs, therapists, psychiatrists, psychologists, all the things. That one question and that one, and that one exercise that she had me do literally shifted everything.
Yeah.
And then, God brought her into my life, through a friend of ours in technology, like weirdest things, once I became agreed with God and I said, all right, I'm ready to understand you more so I can understand me more, my, what you say about me, because I'm done being the unhinged, crazy person, the person that needs to be on pills, the person who's now, has lupus, the person, all these things. I'm done.
Yeah.
I'm ready to be healed and healing. And what does that look like?
That's such an incredible journey. It's like unbelievably difficult what you're making it sound easy, but it's unbelievably difficult. And so, because I know what it's like when I haven't experienced this myself, but I know what it's like when you are really sick, when you are really ill and unwell, it is very hard to have the energy and the hope to make the kind of move that you did. So how did you do that?
I honestly have been living through the dark night of the soul, if you will, I always tell people, I'm like, right before COVID and all the things, I was already in quarantine because I was coming off of the pharmaceutical drugs. Detoxing from any drug is god awful, but let me tell you, don't make any mistake about it. Whether you're coming off of heroin or whether you're coming off of an antidepressant, it's hell. Your body detoxing from things, it is hell. So my moods, I was already a moody hot mess, but I was just like, I need to keep me to me. And the more I delved in deep, but it was hard. I mean, it is hard. 2 years ago, I had a heart attack. In 2019, I had to walk around with a pace thing on my heart so I could record, because the doctors were like, what's going on? For 30 days, I had to wear this monitor 24/7. I was really living in that truth and in that identity of being sick, and it is hard. You're absolutely right. It is very hard, but it is possible. And the hope that I found was in allowing myself to receive it. You have to allow God to show up, and he's not always going to show up the way you think. Like for me, like I said, connecting to this practitioner, she's in Iowa. She's an integrative health therapist. She's amazing, but she's in Iowa. All these things, connecting now to my sisters in my faith. God brought me one of my spiritual mentors, Michelle Fatagato-Geen. She wrote the book, But God, an amazing woman. God will bring the people and the tribe to match your energy where you're at. You just have to be first willing to ask, humble yourself and say, you know what? I'm done. I'm exhausted. I can't do this anymore. I can't do this anymore because the way I'm doing it does not work. Humbleness.
Yeah.
Now what?
The
And
surrender.
once you're in agreement, you coming into my life, all these people over the last 3 years, my life has radically changed. And I'm still working on radically changing my mind. But it's a work in progress. I wake up at 4 every morning because if I don't, I need to get my mind right. I have my journaling time. I'm very intentional. My thing with the 30-day me talks is walking consciously through life. You know, I know the buzzword is being woke. Can I just tell you, we need to be done with this being woke business because woke is living in the past tense.
Mm.
We need to awaken and become awake and consciously choose to live this life. Because when you are woke, you're just another mummy. You're just, okay, you're living, you know, what's the world saying? What's the world saying? How can I make myself fit into all the packages that the world is telling me are important and that I need to fit into? When you become awakened and you decide, I'm going to consciously wake up every day and consciously decide how I'm going to behave and be and move through that day, that's a powerful thing. And you're going to start seeing the shifts. And that's what I do. You know, I have a whole thing that I teach in the 30-day me talks of, you know, co-creating with God. I call it co-creating with God, you know, but I personally have to be very specific. Like I'm like, today I choose to feel joyful. And then I'll delve into, you know, why today I choose to give this, you know, kindness, truth, whatever. Today I choose to show up this way. Today I choose to allow myself to receive, you know, today I'm open to new opportunities. Today I'm open to receive, you know, all the things. Write it out. God wants to work with you. Yeah. And that when I started understanding that, like, oh wait, God's in me, that means I have all sorts of power. That's my truth. My truth is God is in me. But what the enemy wanted me to believe and the deep-seated lie that he rooted in me was, Carmen, you're abandoned and you're not good enough. And I lived in that truth for so long that when I started dismantling that, now I'm just like, all people's daggers, you know what? That's cool. You can think whatever. Cool. You know what? It's good. It's what he says about me because I'm rooted in that truth. Yeah, you know what, Carmen, 3 years ago, 4 years ago, 5 years ago, 20 years ago, I was not my best self. And I'm sorry if I offended you. I'm sorry if I hurt you. Hurt people. But let me tell you, I'm a different person now, not by me, by the grace of God and my understanding that he's working with me and through me. But I had to agree to that. Yeah. You know, for a long time, I agreed with the lie. I agreed with, I'm sick, I'm not worthy, I'm abandoned. And then I proceeded to behave that way in life. Yeah. You live your relationships that way, you push people away, or you attract people that are going to match your energy at that time. Yeah. You know? Yeah. So it really, but it's hard. You're absolutely right. It's not a walk in the park, but it's there, you know, and it's also eating, right? So it's mind, body, and spirit, taking care of my body. I had to redo everything. You know, I'm somebody that doctors are trying to say I have this autoimmune condition. Again, I believe in the power word. So I'm even like saying it because I know I'm healing and I'm healing through that, but it's everything. I eat sea moss every morning. You know, I have supplements that I do. I pray, I meditate, stretch, I work out. I am literally very intentional and conscious every moment of my life as much as I can be. Now I'm human. I love Jesus. I strive to be like Jesus, but I'm not Jesus, right? So there's many times that I fall flat on my face and I'm, you know, because we're all a work in progress, but that's where the grace comes in and the allowance and just saying, okay, you know, I'm human. It's okay. And the greatest thing, you know, and I think it was said best with one of my favorite stories, where she says, you know, tomorrow's a new day. God gives us a new day every day. And every day you could have been the worst person today and wake up tomorrow and decide today's the day I'm going to do things different. And guess what? You can do that every single day of your life. Yeah. And once I was like, oh my gosh, I have the power to create my life. What? That's crazy. But it's amazing. Yeah. And it's hard. You know?
I think that phrase that anything is possible is true, but it's not possible unless you believe it and you understand that you have to do it. Yeah. It's not going to happen to you. You are going to make it happen. For now, I was wondering if we could switch over to our lightning round.
Yeah, for sure.
Absolutely. All right. So I have some questions for you. The first one is, how do you connect with yourself?
Well, I connect with myself. My process is I'm up. First and foremost, I thank God for another day. Um, and I sit and I really have specific journaling that I do. I do a Bible study in the morning. Before that, just renewal of the mind and having that first and foremost. And then I delve into, like I said, literally writing out my whole day and how I want to show up for that day. And that's how, I get in tune with myself. And that's my check in. And then that allows me to go into the world. When I don't do that, no bueno. No bueno.
Yeah, I mean, I think what you're saying is you have to find something that works for you and to have the discipline to stick with it.
Yeah.
You know, like, and also to let it evolve and not be a slave to your process. I know that for me, I used to have a very specific meditation practice, and I noticed that now, like, my life has become more meditative. So I don't really need to have that seated practice, but sometimes I do. And so being open to what is serving you at that time, because you are evolving, like,
Yeah.
not to close yourself off to one practice. And
no, that's a great point, because for me too is being out in nature. I'm an earth sign, but I also, like, that's where I find God the most. So I have to be, you'll see me walking the paths, early in the morning, because that's where, and you'll hear, I worship out on the path. I'm just like, me and God time, because that's where I find God the most is out in nature.
mm-hmm.
So yes, there are times where, if I don't have time to do that or whatever, my connection is always with earth and with God and finding them there. But yeah, that's a great, yeah. And as you mature and evolve, yeah, that does.
Yeah. Okay, so what world events have shaped you most?
Well, last year I had the opportunity to speak at the BLM Peaceful Rally in St. Charles. I've been in the diversity, equity, and inclusion space within the tech industry for over 7 years at this point now. So for me, I've been singing these songs for a while, right? I think that the time and space that we're in right now is very interesting. And I think that God has prepared me for such a time as this, is what I'll say. I think that we're, like I said, we're in an interesting shift, and people are either going to get it or they're not, But yeah, I think especially just what's shown up in the world and how my transitions and my growth kind of, mirrored each other in a lot of ways. And to be in a place where God is using me in different platforms, is a beautiful thing. And, it's also a sad thing. I've been a missionary since I was a teenager. So I worked with the Navajos for 2 years on 2 different reservations. I helped build churches that were burnt down because of racism, in Alabama, but I'm 41 years old, still fighting those causes and those fights. And it's exhausting and it's sad. And I'm at the point where I'm like, God has built us for such a time as this. Let's go. Let's start building new processes. We need to stand up. We are the church. I don't need to be in a church to do good in the world. Every day, you're the church. Say hi to someone, help somebody do, or whatever,
Yeah.
Make sure you don't run over a bird, whatever that means to you, But we have to step up and just do better in a lot of different ways.
Yeah.
We have to start, like I said, we have to stop being woke and start being awake, and really start, delving into whether it's working within your community, pick a cause that strikes your heart, reading, helping kids with whatever it is, animals, rocks, whatever it is, get involved, and do something with it.
I love that what you're drawing attention to is the fact that this term woke is like a one-time event. Like, I did that, been there, done that. And awakening is an unfolding process of being open and aware of each unfolding moment, to be conscious in each unfolding moment. It's present tense thing. It's not a past tense thing. I love that. So
Well,
thank you.
especially because it's so much in the culture. And I have a 21-year-old and an 18-year-old. And, it's the buzzword, right? All the actors, we're woke, we're woke. Well, you're walking in the past tense. And maybe if we choose to help our children understand and the collective understand what that actually is, we'll start seeing some shift, right? Because it's renewal of the mind. We can't have these generations walking around being woke, because what are we going to be? I just, yeah, you know what I mean? Yeah.
Yeah. So what have you done that has surprised the people closest to you the most?
I think come back to life several times. I think at this point they're like, if you're gonna kill her, you better kill her. Make sure she is dead, gone.
Yeah.
I have resurrection power through Jesus. Whether that's mind, body, and spirit. But I think also the fact that I've been able to create a little bit of a career for myself. Again, I'm dyslexic, no college degree, just happened to understand opportunity and when to take it. And I believe that you and I touched on this previously before in a conversation when I said, I never lacked opportunity. For a long time, I lacked awareness of how to take advantage of that opportunity, right? Mm-hmm. So, I think Beautiful. My resurrection power,
Yeah, for sure. 4 bullets in the back. What's your favorite season?
Oh, see, that's hard. Being from the Midwest, I love the fall and the changing of the colors and the seasons, but I hate being cold. So but fall, the colors, my favorite, but the heat from the summer. So if I can have, I would say fall. I love the colors, and it gives me hope, and which is interesting. Like, I think more people associate spring with hope, which I do too. But for me, when I see the leaves falling, I feel like I'm shedding stuff, my old self. So when, because I walk the prairie path 365 all year round, you'll find me there, unless it's like below zero. People are like, who's Sasquatch? It's just Carmen. But, I love seeing the renewal, right? You see the death and you're like, man, all that stuff is just fluffing off. And then that there's going to be a process of learning, and that come springtime, you're going to, yield new fruit or whatever that is. And that's exciting to me. So that's, I love the fall. It reminds me of death and renewal and color.
They kind of exist side by side in the fall, like you really get a sense of them both. Like there's still all this vibrancy, and it is like, that is the signal that things are dying, so it's like, it's interesting. Okay, my last question is, what is your idea of heaven?
My idea of heaven, great question. I believe my idea of heaven is where we are with God, where we are with community, where we are with absolute pure joy, light, and beauty. I believe that we have the power to manifest heaven on earth as being the living, walking representatives of God. And I think that when we get up there, it's going to be such a jubilee and such a party. And, I'm super excited about it, but I'm even more excited of bringing that awareness into this awareness, because as above, so below, as in heaven, as it is on earth, right? And I think that's what God wants us to do. God wants us to bring, that's why it's as it is in heaven, have it be on earth, because he's given us that power. So, yeah.
It's been a long journey, though.
It has.
So did you bring a question for me today?
I did. I am fascinated by your quest of wanting to unfold and unpackage life. And, I wanted to check in with you and see, with your unfolding and your unpackaging and your awareness, what's the space that you're sitting in now, coming through what you've come through and creating what you've created and what you continue to create.
Wow, that's such a big question. How do I even want to answer that? I'm at a particular point on my path where I feel like there is a great releasing of the past and past ideas and past lives, everything. And I'm preparing myself by clearing out everything that I thought I knew about myself and about the world, clearing that all out so that I can step into what's next for humanity. And I have seen that the work that I've been doing in my life and on myself and trying to share that with other people who are, at a resonant point in their path has been unfolding according to plan. And now I'm kind of in a space where I have to like let go of that because I'm not certain that I know what that's going to look like going forward. And I suppose that this is going to become a way of life, that we will constantly be releasing what we thought we knew so that we can receive and step into what is there for us now. And I'm assuming that what is there for us now is going to be an ever expanding sense of power and self and freedom and joy, love, connection, collaboration, like next generation, all of it. That's what I'm preparing myself for. But this in between space is quite uncomfortable, where I don't know what my future holds. I don't know where I am. I don't know. It's like a void. And I'm giving myself a lot of space to be there and not freak out about it and just accept and allow and not be, as knowledgeable as maybe I've seen myself as being in the past. I have to be sort of like stepping into the blank slate and being okay with that. So basically, I have nothing. I have nothing to say.
No, that was so much. And I know that you and I, because we're friends and we're developing that, our friendship, you're singing my song because that's a space I'm sitting in too. So thank you for that, because in you sharing that gave me the grace to give to myself. Because sometimes we feel like we're the only one out there in the uncomfortable space. So thank you for that. And I just adore you. So thank you.
I just adore you too. Thank you so much for being with us. Your story is so inspiring, and I know that people are going to really connect with you, and we'll tell people how to connect further with you in the notes. And so thank you so much for being here, Carmen.
Thank you for having me. Thank you for creating a space that allows these types of conversations. Really, honestly, thank you.
Thank you for that.
Appreciate it. Thank you.